In this video, we're going to talk about resilience. It's a quality we want to foster in ourselves and in our employees. How do we go about doing that? That's coming up now. Hi there, I'm Andrea Adams, the host of HR Shop Talk. On the show, you get expert insight into anything that relates to HR. I encourage you to subscribe to the show or podcast to keep learning from my guests. Today, my guest is Roxanne Derhodge. Roxanne is a psychotherapist, keynote speaker, author, and host of her own podcast called Authentic Living with Roxanne. She's also about to publish a book, and I'll put a link to that book in the description. Hi, Roxanne. How are you?
Good. How are you doing today, Andrew?
I am good. And I'm so looking forward to this. It's one of those topics that's a little bit perplexed me. Maybe not perplexed me, but I've never spent much time looking into it. And so I'm excited about what I'm going to learn today. So we're talking about resilience. And so can we just start off with, what is that exactly?
I think the concept of resilience is, in life, all of us go through things, situations, adversity of some sort. And it's how is it that we cope with it, and what is kind of the length of time or the strategies that we use to bounce back and make sense of any kind of adversity or pain that we're experiencing. Okay,
so my husband, for example, is a very resilient fellow. He developed that through a rough childhood. Like, do you have to have those kinds of difficult experiences in life as a child, or can resilience be developed later?
I think, that it depends on how you think about it. There's two ways you can look at it. I think, looking at your husband's lifestyle, he potentially had to develop ways to cope relatively quickly, and be creative about it. I often say, smart little child, that they have to adapt accordingly and develop some skills that maybe some other people that maybe didn't have to, because they didn't have as much adversity, maybe didn't have to develop later. So I think if you're in an environment where there's uncertainty, you have to get creative, and you become, I think, a bit more tactical, because you have to develop skills relatively early. However, the other counter side to that is that what I call secure attachment, which is the space where individuals, and I would say that, if you look at the percentage of the population, maybe it's a lesser percentage that are completely securely attached kind of scenarios where, and I often say it's the concept that the individual is able to evolve into who they need to be, whether it's an introvert, extrovert, kind of musical, or genetically programmed to play sports. They have two potential caregivers or a caregiving situation that reflects that back to them. So if Andrew loved painting, and didn't like playing baseball, your parental figures at that time, if it's primary upbringing, would facilitate that to kind of ensure that you had every kind of easel and paint and the space to do that. So because instead of saying, everybody plays t-ball and you're just going to get better, they would try to kind of maybe say, you maybe should consider it. However, they would create the space that would allow you to develop and accentuate the strengths that you had. Ideally, we would want to think that everybody grows up with the ideal scenarios, but at some point we all become adults. So that's when I say, when you become an adult, you say, well, that wasn't ideal and that wasn't so good, and I should have gotten more of this or that or whatever.
Yes.
But then the adult state can kick in and say, okay, what is it that I didn't get that maybe I should have gotten? And how is it then I can create that space for myself? Hence where that whole concept of resilience. But at the end of the day, is there one specific way that you're going to develop resilience concepts, other than it's a lag of time or the length of time that you're going to fall down, bruise your knee? And what is the length of time that I get up and I dust it off and go, oh, geez, well, next time I'll wear better shoes. You kind of compensate and you learn from some of those adverse situations. And, the quicker you get up, the length of time that's lessened, that means that, in fact, your resilience is increasing.
So we've been talking about it sort of at an individual level, right? Like so far. What about creating resiliency in the workforce?
I'm going to have to think of it as, we put combinations or systems together. If you think about a family or a workplace or a team, it's the diversity of all those styles that we put together. And really collectively at that point with a team, Andrew, what we're looking at is how is it, let's say somebody that comes in that kind of is securely attached, they feel good about themselves, they can vocalize, they think nothing about making a mistake. Those individuals can kind of go out there and be transparent, be front and center. But if we have different people that are maybe less, forthcoming because they're not as comfortable, what becomes vitally important is the capacity of whoever's leading them to create psychological safety within that team. If I'm kind of insecure because of other things not related to the workplace, but I have a lot of breadth and depth that I can bring to that project or to that new creative idea, the space that gets created where I can just be fully aware and present is a space that I would give ultimately 100% as much as I can. But if I'm kind of uncertain, I might be giving you, well, I'm not so sure this is going to be received. I'm going to be hesitant. I'm going to tiptoe around it. So I often say, if there's safety and security in the context of a team or an environment, what that allows is it allows everybody to give their best potential. The leader or the leadership team is the glue that allows that space to say, if people are relaxed, if they feel validated, if they feel viewed as being equally as important as everybody else, then they're within their space, and then they're able to, give the best version of whatever is necessary for what's needed on that team or on that project.
If this has you thinking or has reassured you a little bit, the way it has reassured me, subscribe and comment. Have you tried to consciously foster resilience in your workforce? How did you do it? How did it work out? Let us know in the comment section. So if we're going to go about consciously creating resilience in a workforce, because, my audience is HR and these are the kinds of things we sometimes try to do, how?
What I think leaders need to look at is, what is the litmus test about people feeling that they can make mistakes? And if they do, I'm not promoting mistakes.
Right.
Expecting people to perform, you took your job as an account executive or, a salesperson or whatever. We're expecting that you have the skills associated with that. But let's say you don't. Let's say you kind of, you got the job, but you had some, but you thought you were going to develop it. But you're realizing now, wow, this pace is really, really quick. And I'm having trouble keeping up, and I'm realizing maybe this particular skill isn't as good or whatever, and I'm trying really hard, but I'm not hitting the mark as much. What space is leadership creating for individuals to be able to have those conversations? And I often say, I don't know about you, but I remember those proverbial once a year performance evaluations or whatever. And, everybody on our teams would be like, oh, geez, when's yours? Have you had yours? How'd it go? I think it's about starting to recognize and having those conversations to say, look, I'm not perfect. You're not perfect. I've struggled, and for leaders to share their story, to say, I remember that time I got onto this, I was early in my career, and, I was like, wow, I think I'm a couple of steps further up than I should have been, and I struggled. And that relatability for others allows them to say, wow, that person is also real. They're showing me a vulnerable element in their career path. So maybe if they felt like that, I should be able to hopefully go forward and share, I'm realizing these skill deficits are a little bit higher than I thought. However, but what I realize is that I'm more of an introvert, and I kind of step back and look, because there's 75% of the room that they take over the meeting. The leader needs to be aware of that and really say, wow, this is great information for me. How is it that I'm going to use this information constructively? So I'm not suggesting they point out that person and say, Andrea said, but in fact, they say, I've been thinking about this from my perspective. And what I'm realizing is sometimes, quieter people in the room, they may have as valuable of things to share. And I'm just wondering, I'm going to today ask some of the people that potentially don't share as much, is there a couple things or a different way that they could share with us as a team? Or what is it that we could do a little bit more to ensure that everybody has a place? So I think it's taking the information figuring out, what is the level of safety or trust for people to share, and to look at that information and think, me as a leader, how is it that I'm going to grow and fertilize all the people on my team so that I can bring out the best possible productivity in them? Because we know that most people, when they're having tough times, we get 65% possibility of productivity from it. That's called presenteeism. I'm sure you've heard that term.
Yes,
so if you're addressing that concern, you're constantly thinking is, how do I optimize it? Some of us will give us 65% because we're having that kind of day. That's normal. We're not talking about that. But as the leader, you're looking at it and saying, what can I do? What is it that I can do so that each individual person on my team, I know what they value. I know what stage they're in. I maybe know if they've been through a loss. I know maybe if they've had a struggle with the recent merger and acquisition. I know they've, this new technical skill has been more difficult. And from that frame, you're kind of, you're like Grand Central Station, and you're kind of trying to think about what is it that each person needs to be able to draw in as best as that they can to bring the best version of themselves to work.
That was great. I love that, because you're painting resilience as less of an outcome and a quality that people have, and more as an activity. And then you really begin to see the connection between psychological safety and resilience. So I did just ask about, creating resilience in a workforce. What could HR's role in all of this be?
Well, I think HR shouldn't be the point that people go to when there's problems. I think as an HR partner, what you should be thinking is, if my job is to assist or to support managers, how is it that you're doing it to say, okay, well, we've got all the HR related functions in tow, and we're tracking all those things. But from the people end of things, how is your skill level with managing people? They call it the soft side to things. I think it's actually more difficult side to things. So as an HR partner, how are you creating the space of safety to say whatever your managers or leaders need? And I'm going to give you an example. So in my role as an executive with EAP, which I worked with one of the biggest companies across North America, we did management consultations. And the biggest feedback that we heard from managers, whether they were a 5-year or less manager to somebody that had been a 35-year, I was often afraid to go to HR because I did not want to be judged by my inability to deal with this people-centered concern. So I would say that from your business partners as HR, you need to understand and create the same space for people to come to you with whatever issues that they have, whether it seems as something simple, which they should know this, is to be able to tend to it and to ask them, what is it that we could do to help your learning? Or is there some kind of coaching space we could create for you, whether it's within, the HR context, or are we looking for something more external to further accentuate the areas, that you're needing assistance in? Offer a bit of support, but know when your support begins and ends, and when you need to triage them off accordingly to the right resources that they need. As the HR leader, what you're doing is you're trying to create the space for the employee to be able to have those conversations. What becomes important is make sure you don't bottleneck the conversation so that the individual doesn't go on to get the skills that they need or the support that they need. And what I think oftentimes gets lacked is the follow-up. So let's say I'm having a problem and I tell you, if it's legal or childcare or whatever, you give me the resource, you say, okay, Roxanne, what can I do as to support you? And in 2 weeks from now, we're just going to touch base. And when you touch base in 2 weeks, you're not getting into what did you do, because that's confidential, but you're going to say, so how's it working for you? Remember that plan we came up with? I gave you some supports. I'm just wondering, how's your capacity to in your role enhanced still, and what is it that you're needing? That plan that we came up with, did it work out? Then at that point, you've closed the loop. They've picked up the baton where they needed to, and then you're going, oh, but you're still having issues around functioning. Let's talk, tell me more. And then you start to negotiate again about what needs to be different. Are they still struggling? What is the plan? What is it that they need from you? What is it that you need from them? You come up with a collaborative plan with an endpoint in mind, and just kind of check with how the process works, in between those meetings. And I think that's something that oftentimes when it borders on personal, in the EAP, that's what we found. People fell right down. They didn't know what to say. How do I say it? Oh my goodness, it's a loss. Like, do I say I'm sorry? Do I not say I'm sorry? All those things.
Totally.
It's either they shut the door or they get too much into it. And there was lots of scenarios, Andrea, that I dealt with, that the HR partner actually fostered a dependency that disallowed the employee to develop the skills that they needed, because they became the soft cushion to land on. And except the issue changed. Next time it was maybe a conflict with an employee, another team member. Next time it was, something else, because you're not addressing the concern, keeping it tight, giving them the resources, and talking about, okay, well, let's go back to again what you need to function optimally, because again, you're not the resource. You're there to keep them on track, triage them accordingly, and then get back to functioning. And employees sometimes just like to talk, so get them the support that they need to talk, because the HR partner, that's not the way to use that support in work.
Yeah, there was just so much in there that I would want to take away, as an HR person, not being judgmental. And it just makes me think sometimes that the HR job, actually, it's quite a hard job. Don't be judgmental, but then at times do an investigation, and you should be very judgmental at that time. And
it's kind of left brain, right brain, right? Don't go into this and you be factually based and you find all the outcomes. And then on the other side, you're dealing with people.
Yes.
Depending on the role that you're playing, if it's an investigation, that's a completely different. If it's, for compliance and all that stuff, that's a completely different hat. But when it comes to managing people on the soft end, the skill deficit at that point, how is it that you're making sure that you're maximizing your capacity as the HR person to meet that employee where they are, really understand what their needs are, and to recognize, I can do this part of it, but this is my role. This is where my role begins and ends. And then this is where I need to send you otherwise. And if there's progressive discipline, you have to go through the process. You have to go through, okay, It's been 1, it's been 2, it's been 3. And if it's bigger at that point, you need to take those steps, because that's the only way and I think most employees want the help, but they don't know how to get the right help. So with the HR partner, in concert with them, they help them to kind of go off. And if it's something more difficult, then obviously they would steer them in the right areas with the benefits that they would have to get the support that they need.
Okay, final question here. So if a company is already doing well, hitting our targets, making lots of money, why should we care about resilience?
Because change is a constant, right? And I think if you have done all your metrics, your short term is in line with your sector, your long term is not increasing. If your arbitrations are down, if you find that your managers are able just to manage to accentuate, you're in a pretty good position. However, things change. People leave, people come, you have mergers, you have acquisitions. Things they're not going to stay the same. So it's in your best interest, even when things are going well, to continue to grow and to ask the right questions, right? So if it's just that you've left, okay, for instance, when there's a downsizing, right? Let's say, and making sure that you deal with who's left. Okay, and how are you dealing with that? So maybe last quarter everything went well, but then you had to make some adjustments. And last quarter or 2 quarters before, everything was okay. But what's the pulse now? So I think looking at that strategy as an overall kind of inoculative factor to say, where are we? How are we doing in our industry? What are our customers saying? Is this information based on just your information, or are there other ways where it becomes more of a cumulative number based on all the various elements where you can really, really get the true feedback. If it's really, really good for you. That means you've figured out a lot of things that maybe some other companies haven't. But in that case, if you're on a good note, why not continue to accentuate it? Right? But because what we've seen in the last 2 years, Andrea, is that people are staying with companies that are within their values about what the kind of life that they want, the age, the stage, those types of things. So if you're doing well, continue to figure it out and say, what is it that we did really well last quarter? What is it that we didn't do so well? Because we want people to be really open and clear. So even if you're doing well, these are sometimes the pebbles in the rough that I call them, that you could start, maybe you can't do all of it, right? Some people might want to go to Hawaii on an all-inclusive trip or something, but you might be able to put little elements in, not get kind of laissez-faire, because we're doing well. And think about asking people, what's the greatest thing about your manager, right? And maybe have different ways about. And if you could pick one person in this company that you could say that you would use as a role model, who would he or she be? And you ask that, and you ask people to give anonymous feedback. That's going to give you a lot more information that you could continue replicating regardless, because changes. When I worked with in consulting, sometimes as much as 65% of my portfolio of companies were going through flux. So even though you might be okay right now, we know, right, in 6 months, a year, things will completely change. So that's what I would say to companies is make sure, check in. If it's going well, validate a little bit more, and build off there. But always stay connected to how people are doing at every level, frontward facing all the way up to every level, because every level has a different angle and value and solution that they can bring to the company that, when you bring those forward, sometimes those are some of the most creative, innovative things that companies need to hear.
Thanks, Roxanne. I love that. She and I also did an episode on dealing with upset people, which is something we have to do in HR a lot. And that episode is right here. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.